So thanks for coming. I don't usually do talks, so this could be kind of random. I'll just introduce myself first. Jason Kahn. I was born in 1960 in New York, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I moved to Europe in 1990. And I started playing music, I guess, in clubs and going on tour around 1982. So this talk is kind of about my experience playing in self-organized spaces. And I think by spaces, I don't just mean like physical spaces like this here, but like the space of self-organization or the space of resistance or the space of creation. So a lot of these spaces took different forms over the years. They took the forms of record labels or booking agents or artist collectives or places like this here. And it's kind of defined my whole experience since I started to play music. And actually, I think the reason Jonas asked me to do this talk is because of this book I wrote 2 years ago. It's called All Along the Way. And it's a tour journal of a concert tour I had in the US, Canada, and Mexico in the summer of 2022. Was 40 concerts. And most of the concerts were done in kind of spaces like we are sitting in today, sort of non-commercial, ad hoc, temporary, non-spaces, people's living rooms, record stores, artist studios, art galleries, everything you could imagine, except really commercial spaces like clubs or something. So Jonas, maybe he thought I was some kind of authority on DIY spaces. I don't think I am, but I just played in a lot of them. And I think I wouldn't be here talking to you today if I wasn't able to play in all these different spaces over the years, because commercial spaces wouldn't have allowed me to play the kind of music that I play here, because it doesn't earn any money. And it's the space of creation and experimentation usually is in direct conflict with the space of financial gain. So I'll just give a brief overview of my history dealing with spaces like today. And I started in the 80s, which was forever long ago, obviously. And back then, I don't remember playing in spaces like this, to tell you the truth. It was mostly clubs, bars. Sometimes a person would organize concerts on their own, and they would ask a bar to use their room or in a bookstore or something, but I don't remember playing in places like this or like we have in Zurich. What was DIY starting in the 80s for me was record labels. They started the idea of being independent of large corporations and just putting out records on a smaller level. And this enabled me to put my music out in the bands I played in and enabled us to go on tour. So through the 80s, I was basically touring all around North America, Canada, US, in different kind of weird rock bands. I played drums. These days I still play drums, but at this festival I'm playing mostly electronics. And in '89, with one band I was in, we got the opportunity to go on tour in Europe for about 45 concerts. And during this tour, the Berlin Wall came down. So after the tour finished, in around middle of November, and the wall came down November 9th, if I'm correct, 1989. I went to Berlin to visit a friend he was actually in the army, he was an officer. And we went to East Berlin to go hear Conny Bauer. He's a kind of very famous free improvising trombone player from the DDR. And I was so blown away. We were in this small club with all these young people listening to this really like, to my ears, pretty extreme music. And then leaving the club and like everything was sort of in chaos, like there were no police anywhere. It was like, it seemed like half the city was empty. There were kids everywhere on the street. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to move here. So I went home at the end of November, and I came back to Berlin at the end of January 1990 with my drum set and some clothes, and I just moved there. And this was like probably the highest point of any DIY culture I ever experienced in my life, because I think the basis of a self-organized space to play in or to do your art in is to have free spaces. In other words, buildings that are empty or that are affordable. And at this point in Berlin, it was really like, especially in the center, I don't know if any of you know Berlin, but like in Mitte or Prenzlauer Berg, it was just like this dark place with it seemed like half the buildings were empty, half the apartments were empty, so everyone was squatting left and right, starting project spaces, galleries, clubs. It was just like crazy, and this was really what enabled me to survive in Berlin. I stayed there till September '98. So all through this period, I was basically surviving by playing in a lot of these self-organized spaces. Places like Tacheles or Anorak, Schokoladen, Im Eimer, in the Lüchener Straße, which became Ausland. Just like loads and loads of others I've since forgotten. There were many squats in Friedrichshain, in East Berlin, further east, where there would be shows sometimes. And so I was basically just bouncing around all these spaces for my whole time in Berlin, and able to earn enough money to survive. And if it hadn't been for these spaces, I probably wouldn't be here now talking to you, because I'd say around mid-90s I got tired of it. It was pretty clear how the city was going to be developed. And a lot of these spaces had to close, either because they were being torn down or the ownership had finally been cleared up, because a lot of the buildings were owned by people who had immigrated to Israel or to the US, and they had to find the families and discuss ownership. So anyways, it took a long time to finally clear the situation up with all the real estate. And as this happened, a lot of the spaces started to vanish, and also my interest started to vanish. So I decided to leave in September in '98, and I came to Switzerland. And of course, where did I end up was in Geneva, which during the 80s had the most, from what I understand, had the most squats in all of Europe. And I lived in the squat Reno, which was really a huge squat. It doesn't exist anymore. And in the cellar of this squat was a club called Cave 12, which through the 90s was quite active, but by the time I moved to Geneva in '98, had gone into a kind of hiatus. And so I was only in Geneva for a year, but this was also pretty interesting to live in a squat, because although I'd played in squats pretty much since I started playing music in Europe, I never lived in one. And unfortunately, I didn't stay very long in Geneva, and I moved on to Zurich, which is another long story, but that's where I live now. And in Zurich, we do have a kind of DIY culture, but it's very institutionalized. And I think this is something that happened after, well, let's say the last 20 years, the DIY culture has been kind of moving more towards support by the state. That means a lot of projects are financed either directly or indirectly by government funding. And I think when I was living in Berlin, this wasn't the case. A lot of the spaces were very much just, you played for the door, and there wasn't much money, but there was a lot of audience, so it somehow worked. But since I've lived in Zurich, it seems like the DIY spaces are very much dependent on culture funding, either from the artists who come to play in the spaces, or the spaces are directly financed. We do have squats, but it's very difficult in Zurich right now. We have almost no free space. We don't have any buildings like this. We have some spaces like the Walkerturm, which is an old Kaserne, but this is, it's not the same situation as here. It's kind of, you have to bring your own money to pay for the space, and we have the Werkstatt Improvisierte Musik, which is a very old project, but this is also very much dependent on state funding, but it's self-organized. And we have smaller programs from people who start their own concert series or art spaces like Das Institut or the Schöneck Varieté. But they're not very active. They might do like 6 or 10 concerts a year. And this makes it very difficult in Zurich for a kind of creative, non-commercial practice to develop. We have some squats, but they don't generally last very long. Right now we have the Post squat on Wipkingerplatz, which is quite huge. And we had the Magma squat in the Magnusstrasse, which just closed, which was there for, I think, 6 years. And then there's various other squats, which are more just kind of like very temporary living situations. They don't organize events. So it seems to me that DIY space is always very temporary in terms of its physical presence. That means in Berlin, this culture only existed as long as the spaces were available. And in Zurich, the spaces only exist as long as they're able to be financed, because in Zurich everything is so expensive. It's impossible to just have a space and not have any money to run it. So where does that leave us? I'm not really sure how it will move forward with DIY or self-organized spaces, because at least in Zurich where I live, to be quite honest, I think there's a spirit of DIY. There's a lot of young people who want to organize things, and there's a lot of activity on the streets, and people are definitely trying to resist the city becoming too expensive to live in. But we have a similar space to here. It's called the Hartturm Baraka. It was also a stadium like this, which was torn down, and now it's just used as a kind of open field with a skate park and a place for kids to play soccer or families to bake pizzas or so on. I played there last summer, but this is also going to go, and they're building a new stadium there, which will be a shopping mall and a high-rise with luxury apartments. So it's refreshing to play here and to be part of this project, because to me it seems a bit nostalgic. I feel like this world that really nurtured me and made my work possible is disappearing. I'm hoping that it will take new forms, maybe in more temporary spaces, but at this point I don't really see how Zurich can maintain a sort of culture of experimentation that's not directly linked to money. And so this is kind of the end of my story, where I live in Zurich. I don't play much there, and there's not a lot of support. There's not like a community. There's a lot of support from the city. There's a lot of financial support from the city for artists, but the way the financial structures are arranged, we don't have much financial support going to smaller spaces. And I think this becomes now a political discussion on a higher level than just squatting houses. It's more like restructuring how we think about financing culture, and not sending so much money to established institutions like the opera or the Stadttheater, which I have nothing against. I'm fine with opera and theater, but it just seems like it's disproportionate, and not enough money is going to the freie Szene in Zurich, and I think in other cities in Switzerland as well, because we not only need space, we need financial assistance to make spaces for us to be creative. So I'm not a politician, and I'm not sure how we can lobby for this, but I think this will be the next step in maintaining these kind of DIY spaces and not just being at the mercy of real estate developers, because this is what it's coming down to in Zurich. In fact, a lot of our spaces that are DIY, like the Volkaturm or the Vim, the buildings are owned by the city. So if the city decides to do something else with these buildings, these projects have nowhere to go to. We have the Rote Fabrik, which was, of course, I'm sure most people know here, was in the 80s, which was actually the first place I played at in Zurich in 1989. It still exists, but it's not really something vital for the community. It's almost more like, yeah, it sounds a bit harsh, but it's kind of like a museum. And it's not really accessible for people like us to do a festival like this, because just their production costs are so high, it would be almost impossible to do a festival like this there for an audience this size. I mean, this is a pretty good audience. Last night, I don't know, maybe we had 40, 50 people. That's amazing. But to do something at the Rote Fabrik, that's way too small. You need like hundreds of people to finance an event there. So that's kind of just a historical situation. But that building is also owned by the city. And it's kind of difficult to imagine actually being autonomous at this point, because we don't have squats and we don't have unused spaces. So I'm hoping that younger people can find some sort of solution or strategy to work around these logistical problems. Zurich seems to be pretty much the most difficult city in Switzerland that I know of to find space to do things. It's so commercially oriented that to do this kind of music, it's almost impossible to just do it for door money, and because there's no way to afford the actual room. So this is sort of the situation. I feel like this is almost inevitable, but I don't mean to be very negative or pessimistic, but I'm not sure what the solution will be for DIY spaces at this point. But anyways, I'm glad that I was here. And I'm glad that I was lucky enough to have experienced what for me was the heyday in the 90s at least of being able to develop what I do in spaces that weren't under constant financial pressure. And I think that's really the most important thing, is to have the freedom to do things that don't make any money or have no monetary value. I'll just say at this point, anyone have questions?
Yeah, I have. And what is about the space of Central Vacherai, or what is it pronounced?
Right, this is Central Vacherai. This is kind of a mixed concept. They have a commercial bar and restaurant in the ground floor, and they have some studios, which are very nice for different projects. But this is also will be torn down in, I think, 2 years. They're going to build a swimming pool, and
In that place?
yes, everything's going there, because there's a Kraftwerk there, which is staying, but there used to be the central Valserei, which was going to be torn down, and they're building a home for older people, a park, a large swimming pool. So, I mean, it's good. Old people need a place to live. But, myself, I've only been to 2 concerts in this project with I had mixed experiences. But I think it's great that it's there, but it will be gone soon. Yeah, yeah, exactly like the Stadion Baracha, which was the Hartturm Stadion before. This is also going to be. This has been going on for like 10 years. People have been trying to push through plans to build a new stadium, and they've always met a lot of resistance from local residents. But eventually it's going to happen because there's a lot of economic pressure to make it. So this is also going to be gone. And even spaces like the Volkerturm, they were really under a lot of pressure and in danger of losing the space because the whole areal used to belong to the canton of Zurich, and the city of Zurich bought it from the canton. So all this city planning does not include art projects usually, at this level usually, so. Yeah.
Okay. Gentlemen, this is more, I'm just going to try to think out loud. It's not necessarily a question, but just a talk on this whole topic.
Can you understand? Thank you very much. So this is more, I will try to think out loud because I've been thinking about this topic. Thank you, first of all, for the very enlightening talk, and sorry for the scare with the volume. You know, it's kind of a field issue in a more general sense. I've been thinking about this a lot because the result of all of this and the lack of all of this, I'm talking from an experience of living and working as an artist in Austria, that we are at this point, if you go now to art school of any kind, you are in a way trained and conditioned to work in a way where basically the first step of making art is writing the grant proposal, right? It is a very, very strange way where basically the art does not happen even often, and you are being conditioned to think this way because now, if you study art nowadays, you have classes for this where they teach you how to be a good grant writer, and it's all fine, right? It's a way of surviving in this system, but because of trying to understand practice of free improvisation, somehow it feels to me that this is not very healthy for the development of an art scene. At least it then falls too much under the influence again of money and again of what is being funded, how it's being funded. So the financial structure directs the development of the art form, which is not good, I would say, right? And then the thing that kind of proposed maybe a new direction or a new option, and forgive me for not knowing the name, but I will look it up if anybody's interested. A colleague of mine, Angelica Castello, a wonderful improviser, she posted a amateur-made documentary about the Mexico City pre-improvised scene. It's on YouTube for everybody to watch. If somebody wants to come to me, I will find the name and share it. But then there in Mexico City, in the midst of this incredibly huge, chaotic town, I could see exactly this, what you were describing in Berlin. So I could see an environment which, of course, because of its complexities, which we don't have, and instabilities, allowed for an extremely alive scene that is exactly run in the way that you were describing Berlin in the 90s, right? With concerts in living room spaces popping up, disappearing, squats, somehow, and somehow for me this brought up some warmth, and maybe the proposition is, this is not a good one, it's not a solution for Europe, but maybe we should also think about these extra European spaces and cities. As you did with moving to Berlin from America, maybe the solution is to start thinking about moving to South America, to Africa, to non-European cities. I'm just saying this is a thought. I don't know if you have a response to this or thoughts, but yeah. Thank you very much.
Should I answer first?
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, actually, I like living in Zurich, and I don't want to move to Mexico City, which I played at a few times, and I really like it. But I feel like I've also organized concert series in Zurich. When I moved there from 2000 to 2002, I organized concerts. At first with my own money, paying the musicians, and then the second year I had some support from the city, which was really generous. And I've also organized concerts since then, one-off concerts. So I understand your concern, but I feel like being in a really difficult situation, living in Zurich, it's not difficult to live there, but difficult to organize events like this. Makes me more stubborn. So I kind of feel like I want to find some way to do that. But the idea that people in art schools, that learning how to apply for money is so important, I mean, that's the world today. So when I started, I didn't go to art school. I went to university. I studied history. And then I started playing drums with a private teacher. And then I started playing in bands. And everything basically I learned on my own. So I didn't have this background of, formalized background of applying for funding. It wasn't something I thought about. It wasn't like in my reality until I moved to Switzerland. And even in Berlin, there was at the time I lived there was very little support from the city. So, yeah, I understand I could be cynical and say, yeah, these kids, they just go to music school, they just go to art school, they don't really learn anything, they just learn to apply for money. But I don't think that's true. I think it's just the way things are done now, that's part of your education is how to survive as an artist or a musician when you get out of school. So I just accept that, yeah. But I agree in Mexico, in Mexico City, there's also, I have to say something from a sociological standpoint. In Zurich, it's not easy to have concerts in your living room if you live in an apartment house, because in terms of society, I think in Mexico there's more lenience or more tolerance for noise or kind of situations. And I live in a building that's 16 stories high, and I have a one-room apartment. I thought of doing house concerts there, but I would probably lose my lease, so I don't do it. But yeah.
So I lived in Berlin too in this time, and I met you there, but you did forget, I think. And I have to say, for that time, it was easy, that's true, but although we always organized spaces with Jutta Weizmann. I don't know if you remember, so she was in the government, and she told us, okay, you can do it.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
Yes, and there in Zurich there is Barbara Basting, so maybe you have to get in contact with her, because she's organizing spaces too, and she's very important for all those money that's given to all those stuff.
Okay.
And she always knows spaces. Maybe you should get in contact with her. I know it's very, very difficult in our times to find nice spaces, but I think we should work together with those people that are in this government. You can't work against them, you have to work with them, even though it's very, very difficult, I know. I mean, and the other point is, for me it would have been nice to learn how to write all those stuff to get money. I didn't learn, so I think it's a good idea that the young people in school learn it, so it's easier for them. You maybe know Christian Kesten, he's very good in that, and so he can survive on his art. And I'm always happy when I can work with him, because there's always money. You know, and I think it's a good idea if you are a composer that you learn how to make this, even though it's pain in the ass, but I mean, better bit pain in the ass for that you can do art than losing your art. That's maybe my opinion. But I think too that the point of culture at the moment is not very good thought, because culture doesn't come from the stuff we know. Culture comes from the stuff we try to do. And I think that the normal people that give the money don't understand that, because they don't understand that it's clear if you do something new, nobody's coming. But even though this is a development, we don't want to stay at the point where we are. And you always, I mean, the theater gets that much money, not because they do the stuff they always do, because there's a study they showed to the government that all the stuff they do makes money too for the city. But we can't do that with little art. This is only for the big art. So if you take the money from the Stadttheater, it doesn't work. I think there's enough money there, so they could give more money to other projects. It's just a thing of how they give money and whom they give money. But even though ask Barbara Busting, please.
I'll just say one short thing to that. Coming from the US, where at least when I grew up there, we had probably negative assistance for people like myself. When I got to Europe and I realized, there's money available for free if I just fill out a form, I was like, okay, great, I'll do it. So I don't have a problem. I mean, I'm doing this a lot myself with Pro Helvetia, Foundation Suisse, Schweizerische Interpretenstiftung, Stadt Zürich, Kanton Zürich, so many sources, and it's really maybe the sad thing is a lot of the times I go on tour, like the tour for this book was completely financed by Switzerland. None of these places I played, except 2 places in Canada, which has better funding for the arts than US. None of these places, 40 places, only two of them could pay me a guarantee. And the rest was just playing for the door, and it was like $50, $100, such low money. And this was, of course, right after COVID, which was one reason I wanted to do the tour, to kind of reconnect with people and play music again. But I just realized that how privileged I am to live where I live, and how difficult it is, even more so now, for people who don't have these resources. So, on the one hand, yeah, it's, like you say, it's a bit weird that they learn to, in school they learn to fill out these forms, but I think it's really necessary today, because anywhere I play in the world, last year I was in Taiwan, Japan, Korea, New Zealand, Australia on one tour, and it was the same thing, you know, almost none of the places could offer anything, really nothing at all except their infrastructure. They couldn't offer a place to stay, they couldn't offer anything to eat, they couldn't offer a guarantee. So it was really like, okay, if I want to do this, I don't have the money myself, so I have to find a way to finance it. So, and you know, working with the city government to find spaces, I think that's great. I'm not like a hardcore Hausbesetzer against the state, but it seems like it's great. It's always a temporary situation though, and it makes it very difficult to plan. And speaking of funding, I'll just go off on one more tangent. A lot of the funding structures ask you to submit a schedule of planned events for way in the future, for like a year in advance. And if I'm doing a concert series, I don't want to have to, especially at this level, I don't want to already have to lock myself into 12 concerts for 2025 or 2026, and and they're not even giving me a lot of money. I mean, I'm not trying to be ungrateful, but it's like they're giving me maybe 200 Swiss francs per person per concert, and for that money I still have to plan so far in advance. So it's like you say, they don't really understand what we're doing, a lot of these culture institutions. They understand established art, but they don't understand experimental art. And actually, a lot of the neighborhoods I've lived in, they were dumpy, dangerous, boring places until the artists moved in and they started their own spaces. And then that really created an environment which made it attractive. And that was art and culture which wasn't commercial. So I don't know how we can convince the people to understand what we're doing. I think it's getting better in Zurich for sure. The city council, the arts council is very supportive and very liberal, and they really go out of their way to help people like myself. So I feel very lucky, but the canton of Zurich is very restrictive, and it's just a matter of where you live. I think Biel is very positive for support, at least for this project, I would say.
I would say we can discuss that in between during the lunch break,
Okay,
because there are many topics. Huh?
May I just make one comment?
Yeah.
Please, leave your time.
Nah,
Or lunch.
everybody is.
Okay, go for lunch.
But
Maybe we go to lunch, but this
Yeah.
is kind of an endless topic, especially for people like ourselves, because we are really dependent on these kind of spaces. And at least for myself, if I didn't have spaces like this, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. I mean, basically that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay.
I just want to say that, no, just to add, and it's precisely, you know, the spot, then this is the political position, you know, and we're talking then, and to comment what Ivar mentioned, then it's not a question then how we actually move to another place, it's actually how to shape the place where we are. And then learning through the practice, it's actually exactly this venue, what we have now, and the whole event. Through the practice, then some of the people then face it the very first time, some, you know, stuff, then they could reflect how to deal with it, or how to shape it, or how to arrange it. Because we have to face it as well, then new world, or actually present moment, what we are doing, what we are living, it's also reflecting on a post-colonial, you know, position of the world, and as you mentioned now, and it's covered by the Prochelvetia, your tour, and then it's very important to understand, and what we are doing, it's actually beyond the borders. And it's a question, then we have to really, you know, work together then to find another, you know, solution, to learn from each other and to try to shape it, you know. Of course, then we have to have a patience and share this passion in between us. So it's not easy, of course, but I mean, this is very political issue then to fight. Of course, then we could discuss much more how it's actually arranged, the policies of redistributing public money, of course, and you know, fair practices and other stuff, but it's coming to this point, and what we are doing and what we would like to shape it, it's up to us.
Thank you, Zoran. I propose we close it for now here, because it would be also interesting for you to know how we managed to do it here. It's, I think that would be the next step to know, because it looks like independent space, it is, but in accordance with the city, there is a plan for a few years like this, but if you come back in 10 years here, you will pretty sure see something else. I mean, or maybe 15 years. I'm not a specialist, maybe the other people from Biel, they know better than me. And without any private or public fundings, this would not be possible. And we pay a small rent to the association here that runs the thing, it's not a lot. So everything is connected, and yeah, we could discuss it a bit more during the lunch. I think it's time to eat. Thank you, Jason.